A young woman finds out that she's fated to wield a legendary sword. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today it is, no specific day. Rather, I want to talk about a book that I read, one that is about swords and medieval kind of fantasy elements and demons and things like that. I am referring to The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley, which was published in 1982. For those who don't know, Robin McKinley is an American writer who has been getting her work published since the 1970s even. She primarily writes sort of medieval type stories or fantasy type stories about kingdoms and brave warriors and things like that. And she's also written a number of adaptations of folklore. She's written an adaptation of Robin Hood, as well as at least two Beauty and the Beast interpretations. One of which I talked about on this channel before, which I wasn't that big of a fan of. I had a few problems with, and unfortunately I also have a problem with this story, which I'll talk about when I get to the analysis section. But I should also note that this was nominated for the Newbery Honor for that particular year. She ended up not winning, but she did win the award when she wrote the sequel to this book. So there's some stuff worth discussing around that as well. But without further ado, let's talk about The Blue Sword. I'll do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Blue Sword focuses on the character of Harry, or Angharad, as her brother calls her. She is a young woman moving to Damar, or Istan, which is a kingdom where her brother kind of works after her father dies. She just needs a change of pace. She's living with the royals, but she doesn't really like it because she feels like she's just kind of burdened, not really doing much. But things change when she goes and visits like the Hillfolk, when there's a sort of diplomatic mission between the kingdom and the Hill Kingdom. She sees what things are happening with the Hillfolk, and they are being pressured to join the Homeland Empire, which is currently in a fight against the northern forces, the demonic forces that might attack and also hurt the Hillfolk in the process. And the Hillfolk are being ruled over by Corlath, who is beloved. Harry is drawn towards him when she sees him, and he is similarly taken aback by her, and he tells his men to go and find her because his magic inside of him demands that he try to seek her out. And so they ended up kidnapping her, which is pretty strange. And when she wakes up, he tells her, that she has to be with the Hillfolk now because of some grand reasons. And they have her drink a sort of liquid that grants visions, and she envisions herself as being a descendant of Erin, the first sort of like queen of the Hillfolk, and somebody who wielded a great sword called Gonturin. And so Harry is determined to kind of work alongside Corlath and become just as great as a warrior. She acclimates to hill life, working with another man named Mathin to train to become better. And Corlath wants her to lead his army now against the northern forces as Harimad Sol, which is just, daughter of or something like that. So pretty big deal. And so she has to train with Mathin for the lap run trials, which will basically determine if she can be part of the king's riders there. And Harry ends up doing pretty well in the trials, wounding Corlath in the process, which seems like a big deal. And then Harry is given Gonturin and made a rider with the king's forces. So they pretty much envision her as being the next Erin. and they proceed to march for war. But things begin, there begins to be a struggle with everything. She has a difference of opinion with Corlath, and they go their separate ways, where it seems like she's rejecting this sort of prophecy, this sort of fate that was given to her. She returns to Istan, but realizes that she needs to help the Hillfolk still, so she asks them for help in an effort to kind of add more soldiers against the northern forces. And then they agree to help. Her brother even shows up, and Harry battles this inhuman army that's described as demonic. There's even the leader, Thura, who craves bloodshed and things like that. And while she's kind of watching over everything in this past that they're kind of invading, Harry uses the sword in an effort to channel the energy of Aaron and destroys the northern pass and stops Thura, essentially covering them with rock, which is kind of a weird way to kill them all. But, this is meant for children, I think. And then Harry reunites with Corlath, apologizes for what happened between them, and they are now betrothed to one another, which is pretty nice, I guess. And then there's a peace is established between the Hillfolk and Istan, and Harry and Corlath even have children who do their own thing in the future, which is pretty good. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit worth talking about with the Blue Sword. One of the main elements of the story is the idea of belonging. Harry doesn't feel like Istan really fits her. She moves there in an effort to kind of get away from the memories of her dead father, but it doesn't feel like she really belongs along the royals, and everyone just feels like they're being too kind to her. She ultimately just feels lost after her dad died, doesn't really understand what is in the cards for her. And when she goes to the Hill Kingdom, or is kidnapped by the Hill Kingdom, this does provide some meaning and purpose for her. After all, she's fated to wield this mystical sword, and she's destined to kind of take over for or lead these people in some way. So it's a sense of destiny, which might be exactly what she's kind of looking for here. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "It's that I don't belong here. It doesn't matter that I'm getting burned as dark as they are, that I can sit a horse all day and not complain. It doesn't matter even that their water of sight works in me as it does in only a few of their own. It is only astonishing that it would work in one not of the hills. It does not make that one any more of the hills than she was before," which is a fascinating quote, because it suggests that even though she feels like she belongs, she still doesn't feel like she belongs, like there's something missing, like she's not of the hills. She isn't truly part of Corlath's people, even if they do find some ancestry there, which she does find. And going back to Istan, it feels like there's more of a connection there for her, but she still feels pulled by Corlath and the Hillfolk. So it does seem like there's a best of both worlds happening here, where she manages to live in both worlds. However, I feel like that's a cop-out for this story. Harry needs to make a choice to feel like there's an actual, choice being made, that there's actual character decisions or characterization happening, and Harry never really has to make that choice. No one forces her to make that choice. She's not taken away she's taken away by the Hillfolk, but they say you can do this if you want, and she just decides to do it, but she never really makes that choice. And so I feel like in order for you to truly belong somewhere, you have to make a conscious decision to do that, and Harry doesn't really do that. So I feel like the story suffers there. Another element of the story is destiny. There's the question of what is it like to be the fated hero. Any good story about prophecy or fate or destiny or anything like that will have the character questioning that, will have the character thinking about that, in order for someone to understand what it would be like in that kind of position, make it relatable. However, Harry just ends up accepting and rejecting the call to destiny in this story. She accepts it by taking the sword and using it in a major battle, but she rejects it by leaving Corlath in the middle of the story, and then joining Istan, and then kind of brokering a peace between the two worlds. So she, again, it's a sense of belonging. It's a sense that that Harry is not really making a decision in the story, and it becomes all wishy-washy. If you don't accept or deny the call to destiny, then what's the point of the story? The whole point is you are like Aaron, you are fated to wield the sword and lead our people to prosperity, and it never really seems like Harry decides to do that again. And she never really reflects on what that means. She just sort of accepts it, and it leaves the story feeling a little bit hollow there. It's also important to talk about conflict in a story. Conflict provides substance for the story, which I'm sure many people are already familiar with there. There's many stories out there, in the Harry Potter series, there's the conflict between Harry and Voldemort, and he has to, defeat this great evil. In the Hunger Games series, there's a conflict between the starving people of District 12, District 11, one of those districts, and the king, President Snow and those other kingdoms. And so there's something juicy to kind of latch onto in that story. But here it doesn't really feel like there's an inherent conflict. Yes, there's a lot of plot that happens. There's a major battle that happens, but there's nothing really kind of providing a sense of struggle for Harry. She doesn't have a pushback to the kidnapping. You would think that if you were kidnapped, you would probably have a reaction to that. But Harry's just like, oh yeah, that happened, and I guess they think I'm there. They think I'm a pretty important person to them. She's blasé about the training. She just sorts of does it and does it pretty well. So there's no struggle there. And she never really questions her destiny at all. The final battle at the end is kind of a breeze. She just raises her sword. She doesn't have to fight Thura. Like, he proves to be stronger than her, but she ultimately buries him under rubble. And there's no real major kind of pushback or kind of threat in that battle that makes us question whether she's going to overcome the odds and make it through this dilemma that she's going through. The story, in essence, just kind of happens to Harry. There's she's a woman in this story, which there'd be a lot to talk about there, but she just lets all of it happen and is just kind of passive in the whole thing. And that reminds me a lot of the story of Beauty that Robin McKinley wrote. It's an adaptation of Beauty and the Beast. I've heard people call it somewhat feminist, but my problem is that the character of Beauty in that story just sort of lets Beast kind of have her. Like, she never really questions the fact that she was kidnapped. She just remarks in wonder at the Beast's whole thing, and then he turns into a human at the end and they live happily ever after. But the problem with that is there's no real struggle in the story. It's just something that happens, like eye candy, more so than anything else. And if you want something of more substance, this isn't really going to provide you with that. And so, this was nominated for a Newbery, and I have to wonder, why. There's a lot of interesting things in the story, but very little kind of underpinning them. Very little kind of like in terms of struggle or conflict or anything like that. Maybe the sequel is more fascinating and that's why it won the Newbery, but given my experience with Robin McKinley's writing before, I have to question if she's, I have to question her ability, and I have to question if she's going to be able to compel you in the way that you need to be compelled when it comes to writing and art. I don't think I'm fully done with Robin McKinley. I see her writing and I feel like there's so much potential and she's not meeting it, but that's probably not the case for her other stories, and I want to give her another chance. I feel 3 strikes and you're out or something like that. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Blue Sword by Robin McKinley. It's okay, it's fine. I didn't like it. I think there's way better stories out there that say exactly what she's saying here about fated heroes of destiny, especially with feminist elements to it, that do it way better than Robin McKinley did. That doesn't mean Robin McKinley is necessarily a bad writer. It just means there's something that she needs to really work on with this, and I hope her future work manages to have done that. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on this, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you and have a discussion about this sort of thing. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this story or this author if they don't know about either. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and mystical sword-based travels. Farewell.